So wonderful. You want to watch it again? It'll be there for you. And if there's some folks that miss it, we'll have it updated within 48 hours on our YouTube channel. So to give you a little indication of what we're talking about today, we basically have COVID, and more COVID we will talk about, and then a whole lot of other things. The good news is there are other things. Some of those other things are probably not why you're here. So we'll start out with the COVID discussions and kind of give you an idea of where we're at, what we're doing, and where we expect to go. The guidance is a moving target, so we'll fill you in on the latest and greatest of that, give you some resources, and then talk to you about events and activities. We are opening up school to more things. We've got some exciting things on the horizon, so we'll share that with you as well. So right now, the guidance from the state continues to be schools are expected to stay open, and that is music to our ears, because that has been our goal from day one, is to provide as much of an open school environment that was safe to do so. The state has essentially provided school districts, including San Pasqual, a bunch of money to stay open. And we've used that money to make things safer here. Between over the winter break, we put in all new air conditioners. We have medical grade filter air purifiers in all of our classrooms. We've got masks that people are required to wear inside, providing for kids. We've got some new improved masks on the way. All that kind of stuff has really come from the state to say, hey, we've given you this money. Now you keep up your end of the bargain and stay open as long as it's advisable to do so, is kind of how they phrase it. The two biggies would be if there was things that were really putting the health of our students or staff in jeopardy, would be a potential reason for closure that we'd go through the health department and kind of discuss how that's working. And then the practical closure concern is just not having enough people. And that has been our concern as we've been rolling through this early part, and we'll kind of share with you the magnitude of the COVID impact here. But our staff has been amazing. Mrs. Hanson is a miracle worker on getting enough teachers in classrooms. Mrs. Brown is doing the same with our classified employees. And although we don't have as much as we normally have, we do have enough to continue to have kids in their own classrooms and continue to keep this thing moving. And we're seeing some signs of improvement, so we're hopeful to be past that. So the staff shortages are still a concern. We do have some open positions to fill on our classified side. So we are putting out some notices for instructional aides, folks to help out in the classroom as teacher assistants. And we also have some positions open as duty aides or playground supervisors to help kids outside during lunch and recess. So if you're interested in any of those, drop a note in the chat to Ms. Hanson, and we can follow up with you on those opportunities. So the COVID status, good news right now is that cases in our region and mirrored here at San Pasqual appear to be dropping. We saw a huge surge in January, unlike anything we've seen in the past, what are we, 2-3 years into this thing right now. So a surge unlike any other. And that has put us in a position where we want to make sure that you guys know. And so if you have not received notice that your child has some exposure, consider yourself lucky. We update our dashboard pretty much every day, so that if you look on our school website, Ms. Hanson can throw the link in the chat to our dashboard. But what you'll see is we've had 126 confirmed cases among students and staff of COVID for this school year, far and above what we saw in the previous year. That's about 20%, 22% of all of our kids and our staff have had a confirmed case this year. What's probably most shocking is that out of those 126 cases, a little over 100 of them happened in January alone. And so when people talk about the contagiousness of this current variant, they ain't fooling around. Some of those, we have very little evidence that there is spread here at school. There are pockets that we've seen here at school, so we believe that there may have been some in some circumstances. Most are generating from adults to kids, and then they infect pretty much full families. The good news for our school community is that we have not heard, similar to what you hear in the news, We have heard a lot of mild symptoms, a lot of, we have not had any of our students and staff requiring any extensive medical assistance for it. And so we tend to be moving through it similar to the rest of the community. But the challenge is it really has been pervasive. So when you have all those cases, so we've had those 100 cases in January, there's been a lot of confusion as far as how we handle it and what do we do. The local health department and the County Office of Education have put together these 4 decision trees. And really what they are is they're decision trees that say, hey, if somebody has COVID or they're exposed to COVID, here are the steps that schools are required to take. And so that was wonderful news for us because things are really confusing as far as, okay, how are you supposed to handle this? And if they live with somebody and if they have a sibling and if they, have an exposure at school, what do you do with all these things? And so that's a really nice tool for us. But as you will see, it is quite convoluted. There's a lot of branches on those trees. They go about 4 pages long. And the other confusing piece, and this has been the frustration of our school community, is that they change very frequently. We knew it was bad when they started putting the time of day, the updates occurred. So we do see some of these updates multiple times a day, which has led parents to say, hey, I talked to you this morning and this is the guidance you gave me. And then my friend talked to you this afternoon and you told them something different. That is in direct relationship to this changing level of guidance. Although it's really frustrating, the good news is a lot of these changes have been towards that overall goal of what are the pathways that we can have kids stay at school or get back to school? What are the pathways we can have adults stay at school or get back to school? So it's been moving in a direction to allow more in-person learning and in-person instruction. But I really want to thank you for your patience and your flexibility because it's really been confusing. We're going to put in the chat right now for those of you who like to geek out on all those things and see all the pathways that we'll explain to you. We'll put that in the chat as well. And it'll put you on a page that'll show you essentially the 4 different trees. One of them is a symptom and isolation tree. And basically that, I'm not going to go into too much detail because it might change by the time we're done. But the symptom and isolation tree basically says, hey, if your kid has some chronic condition that is making these symptoms, just give us a note from the doctor and then that kid can stay at school. It does say that if there are symptoms and they are consistent with COVID, but they're improving, that child can come back to school with a negative PCR test. One of the big changes in the guidance is that an antigen test, so those rapid tests, those home tests that you take, those are good for just about everything except for symptomatic kids to come back to school. So they do require a PCR test for that. And the reason being is what we're seeing in a lot of cases of kids and adults that have symptoms is the threshold level to test positive on those antigen tests is lower. So we see some kids that will develop symptoms and early on test negative on those home tests. And then 3, 4, 5 days in, you'll see this positive test. So those PCR tests are the molecular tests. They pick up at much smaller levels. And we're allowed to see if there is COVID that's starting to brew. So that's the reason why they have those PCR tests. If you have a kid who's symptomatic and they test positive, one of the new guidance rules is students and staff can return as early as day 6 from the onset of symptoms, or if they're asymptomatic from when that first COVID test was. And so the nice thing about that is your child can test on or after day 5, and that can be a home test, can be an antigen test, can be a PCR test. The recommended test in there is the antigen, because the PCR test results can hang on for up to 3 months because they do pick up these things. So you're unlikely to see it clear from your body that way, but we are literally seeing folks that are doing the antigen test, and it's very much like a pregnancy test. You get your control line and your positive line, and we're seeing the intensity or brightness of that line decline typically 4 or 5 days, and then 7, 8 days, we're usually seeing them turn negative and be able to come back to school. So that's how that symptom isolation stuff works. If your kid is asymptomatic positive, and we are seeing some of those, especially with the new variant, folks that never knew that they had it, but they've tested because there's been some level of exposure or just some level of surveillance vigilance. And so if your child is asymptomatic, They can come back. Same with those other students that test positive. Come back on day 6 with a negative test day 5 or later. Otherwise, positive students cannot come back until day 11. So if they test positive and you decide not to test them or their tests continue to be positive, they can come back at day 11 regardless. And so some folks say, do I have to do do they have to get a negative test prior to them returning to school? The answer is no, it just expedites the return. So if you look at it in broad terms, a child who tests positive is out about a week. If they test negative after that time, they can come back. Otherwise, it puts them out about 2 weeks, puts them out until that day 11. The really complicated piece is the close contact quarantine tree. And you'll look at that one and it'll make your head spin a little bit because it goes all over the place. And there's a lot of ifs and buts and ands and ors all tied into that one. We can walk you through that one. If your child is considered a close contact, we can walk you through it. Good news is for school exposure, they've simplified it. So the tree depends on where the contact occurred. It depends on if you're living with somebody who's COVID positive. It depends on what model the school uses. And we're using what they're calling the group contact tracing model. And really what that says, and this is what explains when I kind of made a joke that you probably didn't think was very funny at the very beginning about you probably got a notice. Reason for that is those notices are going out to whole classrooms. So you might recall when this whole started years ago, if somebody in the class had it, the whole class shut down. They were shut down for 2 weeks, and we brought you back. Extremely disruptive and extremely negatively impactful to your kids' learning and your kids' social emotional well-being. That changed to this year, in the early part of the year. If there was a positive individual or presumed positive individual in the class, we'd take a look at where they sat in that class, and we would notify the persons in close proximity. Wasn't perfect, but it allowed us to kind of identify those kids in close range. This group tracing model is a kind of a hybrid of the two, in that all students in a classroom space who shared 15 minutes or more in indoor space with that individual, everybody's notified. That's why you're getting these notices and perhaps multiple notices, because everybody in that room is notified. But unless there's symptoms that develop, those students aren't required to quarantine. They are encouraged to test and get tested day 3, 4, or 5. We can test you here at school on day 3, 4, or 5. So they're encouraged to get tested, but they're permitted to stay in school as long as they don't develop symptoms. And so, yep. Oh, sure. Did you get bounced up? Oh, yes, you did. Okay. Yeah, so like I said, it's a little bit confusing, but it is fairly permissive. And so what it does is it allows kids to carry on, kids to stay at school. But the trick is we do, the guidance strongly recommends that testing on 3, 4, or 5. You can do that outside. You can do that here at school. But expect those letters to continue to come. But those letters will come with your instructions, and they'll come with the instructions on how to register for testing here at school. The last tree I wanted to point your direction to, and Ms. Hanson will throw this on there as well, is the e-decision tree. And this takes those 4-page trees and puts it into an electronic form that you can say, my child was exposed on this date, and whether they're showing symptoms or not, whether it happened at home or not, and it'll walk you through. And that's the same logic that we use as far as how school stuff goes. So if you're want to go into that yourself, feel free. But me and Mrs. Lee and Ms. Anguiano are always happy to kind of walk you through, because like I said, it's confusing and it changes all the time. But like I said, it's moving in the right direction, and we appreciate that as well. On the testing front, Mrs. Lee's done a phenomenal job of creating multiple test options for us at school. So we were one of the first schools around. I don't know if you read in the newspaper, all these schools were complaining that they didn't have these rapid tests. But we got a rapid test prior to the break, unlike most schools that were waiting for them, and some are still waiting for them. We've set up the testing lab here at school that does both the rapid antigen tests, and we can send off for PCR testing as well. And then we had run out of our initial supply of at-home tests, but we were able to acquire, I believe, a couple hundred more just the other day. So we have additional test kits here at school for take-home use. We are limiting them to 1 per student, 1 kit. There's 2 tests per kit. So one kit per student with a current supply. And as these new supplies come in, we'll look to add more distribution times for you. The federal government, whatever your feeling is of the federal government, is providing 4 additional kits per household. Mrs. Hansen will put that link in there if you haven't seen it. It's covidtest.gov, and there's a 800 number as well. I do know that it works. We requested some, had some sent to our house. They're the same exact tests that we're currently distributing here as take-home tests. And like I said, those take-home tests work for just about everything here at school, with the exception of symptomatic kits. One of the concerns that we've had from parents, and it's been a little bit of a challenge for some parents, is that we are not having our symptomatic students or students that have tested positive that want to come back and test again, come into the school to test. The reason being is, if we believe the kid has COVID or is developing COVID, we don't want to introduce them back into school. And so that's created a little bit of a challenge for our folks, but hopefully some of these at-home tests will at least help with the return to school from being COVID positive. But there would be a requirement to get a PCR test if you wanted to come back sooner if your child's symptomatic. So there's some questions about that. We also wanted to talk just a little bit, if you're a 6th grade parent, they have changed the rules of 6th grade camp. So 6th grade camp starts next week. So if you have a student that's going to camp, Monday is when they leave. So a few days to prepare. They had either be vaccinated or have a test within 24-hour rule, and they changed that yesterday. And so the rule now is they don't care if you're vaccinated, you've got to have a negative test within 24 hours or show that within the last 90 days you have a lab confirmed positive for COVID. So those are the 2 things that'll opt you out. So if you're a 6th grade parent, send in to Miss Mallory or Miss Hansen if you have a lab confirmed proof of a positive result in the last 90 days. You won't need to test. Otherwise, come to school at 8 o'clock on Monday, and we will test all the 6th graders before they get on the bus to head to camp. There's a registration for that goes through primary health. I believe that's going to be thrown into the chat somewhere, but there's a link for primary health, which is our registration. And then there's a link that the camp is going to require you to put in, because they have a different system and they'll test them, I think, Wednesday in the camp. Yeah, so that's for our 6th grade parents. If you have questions about it, let us know. They don't let you use the home test positive as your confirmatory test. So if you took a home positive test and your kid had COVID, it was good enough for us. We would have you go through all the restrictions, but the camp wants it to be lab confirmed. So if you have that, have your kid prepared to test on Monday so they can go to camp. Other questions we've had, masks. Masks are still required indoors at school, still optional outdoors at school. There were some recent reports that came out about N95s and KN95s being more effective, especially on the highly transmissible Omicron variant. And so we have just recently received, and we'll be receiving more N95 masks from the state. We got about 2,000 masks that are designed for 7th graders and older, so 7th, 8th grade here at school, and adults. We'll soon be making those available. We were just expecting youth sizes to come in soon. So we have those for distribution on the older kids and expect to have some for the youth. It will not change masking policies. Right now, it just needs to be a tight-fitting mask around the face. Can't be ones that have valves connected to them. There's some other restrictions. It has to fit snugly around the nose and the mouth, that kind of a thing. But there haven't been any changes to the mask requirements. There's just been recommendations that, hey, these masks work better than the other ones. And so we expect to have some supply in for use by students and staff. And vaccinations have been a real big hot topic as well. The California Department of Public Health is recommending COVID vaccines for everybody 5 and up, recommending boosters for kids or for those that are 12 and older. And what they're finding is that it's is still reducing rates of infection, but it's especially with the new variant that there's a lot of breakthroughs, it's reducing some severity of symptoms. So they are encouraging that. We did have a vaccine clinic here at school this past Saturday, the 22nd. We had 51 people that came through, and it was a mix of our students, our staff, and a lot of our parents, a few members of the community as well. It was free, didn't have to register in advance. You could just walk up. The follow-up clinic to that is on February 26th, which is a Saturday. So if you need a first, a second, a booster, you're welcome to come join us. It's from 10 to 2 on Saturday, the 26th of February. They're also doing flu shots at that one too. A little bit late in the season, but if you haven't got it, it might be worth time to get it. So they're doing flu shots as well. It's the Pfizer shot for COVID and the flu shot. Mrs. Hanson will put the registration link in the chat. Like I said, you don't have to register before you come, but it is one in which it'll save you a little bit of time when you're here. Another question we've had is on volunteers. The nice thing is we are able to start welcoming a little bit more volunteers back to campus, despite the surge that we're seeing. There are still requirements of volunteers, not ours, but requirements that come from the state, that if a volunteer is interacting with students here on campus, they need to either be vaccinated, not boosted, but either the Johnson & Johnson or the 2 doses of the others, or they have to submit to weekly testing. So we have folks that are volunteering at school. Some have submitted their vaccination proof, and some come in to see us once a week, and we test them here at school to meet that requirement. So if you want to volunteer and you're ready to do it and you haven't done so, connect with Mrs. Hanson. She can get you pre-screened and make sure that you're ready to go in that direction. The volunteers that test the same way as the kids through the primary health website. So that link will be in the chat for you as far as the primary health link to sign up for volunteering. As I mentioned, we have loosened volunteering a little bit. Currently, right now, we have 3 volunteers at a time per classroom, trying not to make the classrooms too crowded, but we have opened up additional volunteers for outdoor events. So we've had some BizTown stuff recently. We have some other things that classes are doing, field trips that they're doing. Make sure that if you're going with your child on a field trip, that you come in and get us registered, get registered and cleared here, because even though it's off-site, it's still the same requirement as far as working with kids to have a vaccine or to be tested. We had a question about academics, COVID affecting academics. Mrs. Lee and I are actually taking a look at it right now. We have a report coming to the board a week from Tuesday, because the results have been impactful. Having kids out of school, mostly for our younger students, those students who have been kindergartners, first graders, second graders, trying to learn how to read through this process. It's affirmed our efforts to add a full-time reading specialist, English learner specialist, as well as additional aides for reading support. And we're expecting to see some good gains in there. But yeah, it really has been impactful on us. So if you want to learn more about that, come join us at the board meeting. It's February 8th. That meeting starts up at 5:15. Also at that board meeting, we expect the board's going to finalize the transition to school board trustee areas. What that's all about is there's a civil rights law that went into effect that talked about governing bodies, including school boards and including tiny little districts like ours, having representatives geographically based within their district. So we're required to take our tiny district and break it up into 5 tiny parts and have those 5 tiny parts represented by a board member. And so that's the process the board's going through. It's a bit silly, but required. And so rather than get sued, we are following along. But yeah, so you'll see that they had gone through this process already. And with the new census data, they have to kind of rework it based on a little bit of change in population. But if you see in November, your board, if you are a resident of the district and you see in November that you only have one person or one section to vote for, that has to do with those trustee election areas. So kind of silly, but like I said, they'll be talking about that. And then some future events that we have coming up. Middle schoolers have their dance tomorrow night. We're doing that outside. So if the girls are in their party dresses, you might have a sweater for that. It is their formal one, but we are keeping them outside. So that does mitigate the spread, does allow a little bit more flexibility with their masking. But they do it in a really cute way. They kind of clear out the stuff at the lunch tables, put some lights out and that kind of stuff. So it'll be nice, but a little bit chilly and hopefully safe. Parent Healthy Kids Survey. It's our school climate survey. That runs through tomorrow. If you haven't had a chance to take that, I encourage you to do that. It really talks about your perceptions of the school as far as school climate, safety, academic programs, teachers, leaders, that kind of stuff. So good information for us. And we take that information directly and we report it out to the board and we put it in our annual plans. So we pay a lot of attention to that. We do kid surveys of our 5th and 7th graders as well. And then we do surveys of our staff. So look for that information to come out. Usually that comes back to us in April. So we'll put that stuff. But if you haven't had a chance to take that survey, it'll be sitting in the chat. Let's see, 6th graders. I can't. Oh, yeah. Our DLAC group is meeting again. And what's really nice is our DLAC group has had about 3 or 4 meetings within the last month. And they've switched their meetings to virtual for safety purposes. And we have a good crowd. So if you are a second language speaker, especially a Spanish speaker, and you want to get connected to the school, great place to do so. So they have another meeting coming up this Wednesday at 5:30. It's their mono sessions. But feel free to contact me or Mrs. Zeigen or Mrs. Morris, and we'll get you connected to our DLAC. Our PTO is continuing to meet. They'll be meeting right here in Trussell Hall next Friday, February 4th at 8:45. So if you'd like to find out what PTO has in store. Our school board meets here on February 8th. Like I mentioned before, a couple items there. And then the following week, our foundation is remaining active. So you've probably seen some solicitations for the green envelope campaign. So continue to give and give generously, we would ask. Foundation does some amazing things for us here at school. And they are coming up. The kickoff is on Valentine's Day this year for the Apex events. February 14th, there'll be a kickoff. So you'll probably see, I won't say probably, definitely see some asks after that. There's going to be a couple assemblies and they'll kind of explain what's going on. But the gist of it is that the preschool through 5th grade students are going to do the dance-a-thon similar to that they did last year. We're looking at how to do that not completely virtually. So we're looking at how to do the dance-a-thon, and it's very similar to the run they used to do, but they do dance moves and they teach them these series of dance moves instead of laps. The kids and the teachers loved it last year. So we're looking forward to that piece for the preschool through 5th graders. And then the middle schoolers were able to bring back the color battle. So if you've ever seen the color runs where there is, powders and dyes and all sorts of stuff. So I would encourage you, if you have a middle schooler, to participate in that as well. Their fundraising stuff goes into different packs of colors that they can get for the battle. But I would not send their Sunday best that day. As far as their clothes go, they will probably get dirty if they choose to participate. Foundation also has a golf tournament coming up in April. The last golf tournament they had was the most successful ever. The folks that waited to the last minute did not get to play because they ended up selling out. And so the golf tournament was really successful, both in participation and fundraising. And so they have registrations open for this spring's tournament. You'll see it's called Scramble for the Saints. It's on Saturday, April 2nd at noon, shotgun start, and it's right here at Eagle Crest. So it allows folks, if you are close, possibly to walk or ride over to get to Eagle Crest. There are some early registration benefits. They end when February ends. So February 28th is the end of early registration. Looking for foursomes, visit spu-foundation.org is the website that you can register. Ms. Hanson will throw that in the chat as well. And then they got some social media accounts at SPU Foundation, or you can just contact Lindsay Dean. She is their social media wizard. All right. So, all right. Okay. Looking to see if we have any other questions. All right. So, Ms. Hanson, are there any questions in the chat? Okay. Okay, so there was a question in the chat about the Gay Straight Alliance, the GSA Club. So there's a question as to if we had one here at school and to learn a little bit more about that. So the answer is yes. We had a GSA club that was established earlier this year. It was established, it was student initiated. So there were some students that came, petitioned to start a club, and essentially for a club, you need a faculty advisor and a voluntary participation. So we have, that club meets, I don't know all the specifics of it. I do know that they meet at lunch. It's led by our school psychologist, and it's really designed to be a support system for students. And like I said, a student-led and generated club. I'm not too sure whether any more specific questions about that. Okay, so if you had that question, feel free, if you want to put any more details in the chat, or unmute or follow up with me afterwards. But yeah, we don't have too many clubs. Typically, most clubs that schools have, high schools have a lot. Most of them are built into their teacher roles. But in order to have something like that here at school, we need faculty to do it. And so we just don't have too much as far as that's concerned. I know I talked a whole lot. You guys have listened a lot here. Did you have any particular questions or anything that was on your mind?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about athletics.
Yeah.
Specifically an overview about the sports, their availability, and really information on it, because it's not, the website's not too robust.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you about
what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's my question.
Cool. Yeah, so for those of you, if you didn't pick it up on the Zoom, the question was, can we talk a little bit about sports, what's available for sports, and you know, kind of how the selection works, who can participate, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay, so we have our sports program is a middle school sports program. And so it's
What's middle school?
6th, 7th, and 8th.
Okay.
And so depending on the sport, well, nearly all sports, they'll do the initial tryouts for 6th, 7th, and 8th. They have about 6 seasons a year. So there is basketball, soccer, volleyball, football, cross country, track and field. Am I missing any? Okay. So they'll have those seasons. They each go to about 6 to 8 weeks per season. There's a boys and a girls team that play as boys and girls teams. And so there'll be a counter. So for instance, if the girls are playing basketball, maybe the boys are playing soccer, you know, that kind of a thing. All of them get to play, both genders get to play all sports. And then the track and field and the cross country are both done at the same time. And they're more limited one-time event type things. The way the tryouts work is the kids are notified. Mr. Bostrom Jr. is the overseer. He's essentially the athletic director of it and coaches. Mr. Veach usually coaches the other half of it. So they take those two teams. When the tryouts occur, they'll take as many kids as they can accommodate and still allow it to function, meaning that they wouldn't want to take 40 kids for a basketball team that you can only play 5 at a time, kind of a thing. When they have too many kids, they will take the 7th and 8th graders and prioritize them, because the main idea for this program is to get kids to have the opportunity to participate. So we'll have some 6th graders that, if you looked at their abilities, would be better athletes to play, but we know that they'll get opportunities in 7th and 8th. And so when you look at the selection of those, we don't know how many people are going to try out to that first one. So typically they'll have folks that'll try out. And then if there's so many kids, they may say to the 6th graders, we're not taking any 6. We have had some times where they've had to cut some 7th graders as well. But our goal is to get people to participate, because a lot of these kids won't be able to participate on high school teams. And so we want anybody who wants to play, have the ability to play. So that's kind of how that selection goes. And it gets confusing a lot of times for some of the younger kids because there'll be a sixth grader and they'll want to play and then say, well, why did you invite me to tryouts if you weren't going to take me? But we just don't know what the size of the group is going to be until that first tryout. Does that answer your questions or is there more?
Yeah, it does. I find it misleading to say that sixth graders are part of the middle school program because, I mean, in my case, my son has yet to be able to try out for anything. And, you know, so I think you should just call it something else other than middle school. You should just call it seventh and eighth.
Yeah.
And I didn't have an opportunity to try out for anything, you know, other than cross country.
Yeah. And actually, I think you make a really good point. What we've seen, and it's a good problem to have in a bad circumstantial situation, is we've seen a ton of kids want to play sports, much more so than in previous years. And I think it's a function of kids haven't been able to do things. And so you're having a lot more kids that are joining up. But I think to your point, it probably makes a lot more sense instead of having them all come seventh and eighth. And if there's not much, then you kind of dip back into sixth instead of having them kind of let down. I think you make a really good point. Any other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Regarding the sixth grade camp, the COVID test on Monday.
Yep.
Is there a registration that needs to be set up for that or just coming at 8 a.m. is fine?
Yeah, no, you should do a pre-registration. If you've had your child test at any time before, then they're already registered. Okay. So if they've tested here at school, they're already registered. Otherwise, you go into the primary health and that link's in there. Yes, the one at camp is different than ours, the one that they do at camp, because they'll require a midweek one while they're there. Yeah, but the one for here on Monday morning, if you've had them pre-registered, and really what we're doing is the kids are bringing all their stuff. I think, are they leaving them out by the bus? And then are they coming over to Miss Mallory's room to test? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Oh, where the funding? Oh, good question. Yeah, the funding for after school sports is general fund. So there's not a huge expense to it. We do pay a small stipend to our coaches, and we pay our referee fees and some of the supplies that go with it. We have done some fundraising for uniforms. So we've had some camps here at school. We've had some donations from our foundation, donations from our PTO to help with uniforms. But yeah, it's the funding from the sports program, by and large, comes from our general fund. I do see a question in the chat that just popped in about asking about band. And we have, in the past, tried to do a band here at school. And what we found with the band is we never had enough folks that were interested in being in the band to generate an outside group to come and lead the band. Because the band stuff was kind of contingent upon somebody knowing what they're doing as far as band goes. And we do not currently have a band leader here on staff. We had a relationship with Bertrand's over on Grand for a while, and they were providing musical instruments. There was a fee for that program for folks, but we had such little interest that they wouldn't continue to work with us because it wasn't worth their time. So if on the question on the band stuff, feel free if you're interested in the band stuff. It's really a matter of threshold of interest. So if we had enough interest, we could reach back out to them and see. Band gets a little bit trickier because of the expensiveness of the equipment and the expertise required. Not that our coaches aren't expertise in everything they do, but you can lead soccer more than you can lead a marching band with less experience. All right. Yeah, good question. There was a question, can we have the foundation fund us to provide more sports? And I would say that the sports is less money contingent and more league contingent. So basically we play in a league with a bunch of smaller local schools. Some of them are charters and some of them are Christian schools. So we play against like Classical Academy and Escondido Christian and Heritage and those groups. We tend to be on the larger side of those groups. So typically in our sports teams, you'll have you know, in the sports that have more kids, like your soccer and your footballs, you'll have one team, and then on your smaller like basketball and volleyball, you'll have an A and a B within those sports. But the ability to actually play games with other teams is really limited. And that's where they end up doing a cutoff, because they'll take typically twice as many students that they can field, you know, on a sport. But they don't take too much more than that, because if kids are getting next to no playing time, it's not the experience that we're trying to provide for them. So yeah, the sports program expansion is less about the money and more about the competition, having somebody to play. Sure. Yeah, the middle school choir right now, I believe we ended up stopping the middle school choir when we let it into this year because there was restrictions on having folks that were singing. I can follow up with Mrs. Reed Smith on that and see kind of where those kind of restrictions align with the choir, because yeah, that was something that we have had really good experience with. We've had very large numbers of kids in the choir. We've had them go compete. They won awards. They go to Disneyland. They do all sorts of fun stuff. But when COVID rolled around, there was restrictions on performances. And so when those restrictions came into play, but yeah, let me, if you can make a note for me to follow up with Ms. Reed Smith. Yeah, I'll get back to you guys as far as the status of the choir. And if that's something that could come back, that would be a wonderful thing. Oh, there's a notice in the chat about adding a golf club. Not a golf club, but yeah, getting a golf club is easy. Putting a bunch of kids together is a little harder. Yes, we've had some discussions in the past with that. And if you're interested in that, just leave your contact information with Mrs. Hanson. We had some contact a couple years ago. This was pre-COVID with the management of the golf course, because it's a real easy thing to have kind of something that we can connect to the school, but have a benefit of the club across the street. So the key part on that would be if it was school related, we'd need to have somebody from the school connected to it. If it's coordinating some folks together with a parent, maybe it might not be a school thing, but we can kind of help facilitate it getting created. What happened years ago was we were talking to the owner or the manager, and then he became not the owner or the manager anymore because they've had some turnover over there. But they're very friendly to youth golf over there. You can get part of, I'm not too sure what it's called, but there's a pass. My son's done it, and you can go play essentially for free. It's like $5 to go play golf. And so the cost of that would be really attainable. The tricky piece would be, I'm not aware of any staff that could lead a club, but we could help you communicate and facilitate conversations with the course. All right. Any questions that you have or anything else you guys have? Anything else in the chat, Ms. Hanson? All right. Well, I am so happy to be talking about things other than COVID with you because it's a good sign that we're ready for more. So we'll look into a couple of those things, especially the choir stuff. And then, like I said before, if you've got some interest in the band stuff or the golf stuff, put your information in the chat and we can try to facilitate that moving forward. But thank you guys for joining us. I am very optimistic getting to the point that things are going to get better. It has been a challenging January, and I appreciate you guys and I appreciate your support as far as your understanding of the challenges that we're going through and your commitment to your kids and their education. And if you have any questions that we did not answer that you'd like to talk about offline, please follow up with us. And we will have another one of these shortly. But in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out if there's something that you need. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Have a great one. See you soon.